might be possible or what might not be possible. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Paul has already said something, but something to explain maybe those two things about me will help you to understand. And then I'm going to show you a video, if I can get online. That's the other thing I need to do. Okay. So, Paul is right. I've never worked in the university. I was thinking on the flight coming over. So I live in Nottingham, and I'm going to introduce you to Nottingham in a minute in the video. I live in Nottingham, and so on the flight coming over, I realised that next year it will be 40 years that I've been working in the talk that we'll do this afternoon. So the main thing to say is that my way into this was I studied literature. I thought I wanted to do theatre, and I started off doing theatre in London, well, first in Yorkshire and then in London. And I was doing a play about human rights, and I needed to get some posters printed. This was in 1981. And I went to a community print shop. There were such things then, where you could go and get posters printed, I thought. And what I discovered was community art, because it's the first time I had somebody say to me, when I said, "Oh, can you print these posters for me?" They said, "No, but we can teach you how to print them for yourself." And that was the core idea of community art, the idea that you would do things for people, you would help them, you would empower them, literally empower them, to help them gain the skills. By chance, that day, so I printed my posters, and by chance, we were waiting for them to dry, and the two print workers were reading applications for an apprenticeship. And I had a really nice time that day. I really enjoyed myself. I actually liked these two people quite a lot better than the theatre people I was working with. So before I left, I decided to write an application, and I got the job as an apprentice print worker, community arts worker. That was 1981. Since then, I've worked for about 15 years. I did community arts projects in London and in the Midlands, which is where I now live. And then in the early 1990s, mid-1990s, I'd become more and more interested in the questions around the work that I was doing. What did it mean? Why was I doing it? Why did other people do it? What were its tensions? What were its benefits? And I began to do research. And in 1997, I published the first substantial research in the UK into the social impact of participation in the arts. And since then, I've continued to do a mix of research and my own projects and consultancy work with organisations, which is a lot of what I actually pays the bills, because my own projects doesn't always. The research sometimes pays bills. So it's a mix, but I've been freelance all my working life. Okay, that's. I hope that's enough to give you a sense that I think of myself. I don't like the word practitioner, which is used a lot in Britain, because I grew up at a time when a practitioner was a doctor. But I think of myself as somebody who is actively involved in doing community art work and supporting people who do community art work, helping them, working with them, and thinking about it and writing about it. And all of those things, the doing, the working with others, the thinking and the writing, they're all part of the same essential practice. Talking to you now, it's not that different to when I was 24, I would turn up on a housing estate and have to meet some local people and get them interested in me and what we might do together. So my work is not academic, and I defend that, and we can talk about that if you want. I defend it in the sense that I think art is a way of knowing. It's one of the reasons why it's so important, why we need it, because there are things that we can't understand about ourselves and about other people, except through art. If art is a way of knowing, then it seems to me to be illogical to only study art using social sciences. I'm interested in how we use art to understand art and to communicate art. And I also defend, if you like, politically, the idea that universities and other institutions are not the only sources of knowledge in a democratic society. They can't be. It gives them too much power. It is all our knowledge, it belongs to us all. And we are all capable of contributing to it and adding to it. What matters is how we do that. That we do it with integrity, with honesty, with rigour, and so on. Not that we do it with a job title or an institution behind us. Okay. If you can get me online, I would like to show a little video, because it's a kind of nice introduction to it's a kind of introduction to Nottingham, where I live, and to participatory art. Great, okay. Let's see. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Nottingham is it's the smallest big city in the UK, and it's often forgotten. It's on the River Trent, which is exactly it's the symbolic dividing line between north and south of England. And it doesn't always have a good reputation. It had a lot of difficulty with gun crime a few years ago. It has two heroes. It has many heroes, including Robin Hood. But it has two recent heroes who are called Torvill and Dean. The sound is probably not going to be brilliant on this, but we'll cope with what we've got. Okay, Torvill and Dean were, he was a policeman and she was a police worker, and they were ice dancers. And they competed in the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo. And they did a piece to the tune of Ravel's Bolero, and they got perfect 6 from every judge. It's never happened before, it's never happened since. So of course they won the gold medal, they became heroes. And interestingly, if you look at some of the wider impact that culture can have on a society, we now have the National Ice Stadium in Nottingham, because they trained in a very run-down place. Now we have a nice, lovely, shiny ice stadium. So this is a tribute to Torvill and Dean that was done by Nottingham Playhouse and the dance agency. And I won't say any more about it, except just at the beginning, The film opens in Nottingham railway station, and you will see Torvill and Dean today come through.
Jane Torvill and Christopher Dean. They are 4 minutes away from Olympic gold. Jane Torvill and Christopher Dean. And so, in complete contrast to Karen Mickey, the dramatic Flavel's Valera.
More about it. Is it out?
Can you speak a little bit more about it?
Sorry, I was just saying I'd like to hear what you made of that before I tell you any more about it.
Well, I thought it was nice that they put the audio of the whole performance. I think, like when was it? In
1984. So it was on the 30th anniversary of the gold medal win.
Yeah, I thought it was a nice, a clever idea that he didn't change the audio, but used it as a background for this clip. And if I would receive this clip as a tribute, I would be nice. Yeah, because it's all inhabitants from Latin.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I let you see all the names of the organisations that have been involved.
So there were like different workplaces that cooperated with the project, like the police, metro staff. But the first one was with just people outside. Were they like volunteers who just heard about the project, or?
There were people when the first scene in the foyer of the railway station,
Yeah.
when Christopher Torvill and Jane Torvill and Christopher Dean arrived. They were people who had been involved in the project, so it was a setup.
Yeah. Okay. And the rest were you contacted the hospital.
They all worked. I did prepare a little clip. I was going to show you a little clip of the original film, but unfortunately I couldn't find it in the history. But the dance was exactly the same dance that they performed, and so they worked for quite a long time. I mean, they had a lot of sessions with all of those groups to learn to perform the same dance, because of course it's a very sophisticated, demanding piece of dance, particularly on skates.
For people who never danced before.
No. So they were learning to reproduce that famous dance.
And how did you find your participants? Because it's not the whole fire department, it's a group of firemen.
I don't know for sure, but it will have been they will have volunteered. So, for instance, there were places that you couldn't possibly recognise, but they were in the offices of the municipality, of the city council, and they will have invited whoever wanted to be part of that to join in. And it will have been a commitment because they will have had to attend workshops for a number of weeks, I imagine, in order to be able to do what they do. You can see they didn't get very many
perform
people.
at their working space. Did they rehearse at their working space too, you think?
I don't know where I think they will have worked. They will have rehearsed in their own premises because it would be too difficult to get everybody to travel to a dance studio to do that. So it will have been done in the lunch break, or like that. They'll have had an hour for a period of weeks to learn it. So I think it will have been done there.
It's also a great project for a way to get people work for to socialize more. Right? I can imagine that they.
I think in this case that's probably less likely because they're all existing groups. They're all already members of those social groups.
Yeah, but I can imagine like working intensively on a project will bring you closer together.
It could be.
If
Yeah.
you're only colleagues, then you don't get to have contact with your colleagues in that way. Right?
That's right. It is quite likely to change relationships
Yeah.
and so on. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? How do you think of it as a piece of art? Is it a piece of art?
It is. I feel like it's a well-prepared piece because there must have been a lot of legwork to get there, to even get into to their workplaces to rehearse. The amount of work that it's already preset idea of doing it doing that on the track which is there, and then picking up specifically this group will do this part and this will do this part. I'm so sure they must not be learning everything. So the way they've thought through and the way they've photographed it, the video quality, it's been done so beautifully. So it is participatory art at its best.
The film edit must have involved professionals, and you see Nuts TV, so that must be
Yeah,
a local TV station that has put on the.
It was shown on the opening night of Knots TV. We have, for some reason, nobody is quite sure. The government created some little local TV franchises about 5 years ago, and we have one. I'm not sure how many people watch it, but I think it was interesting that they chose this as the opening thing. And I think it's also interesting that I think the whole story of it is interesting because it shows how a community can. I don't think this would have worked with anything else. Right? It's Torvill and Dean and that moment of magic that is a memory for so many people in the city. That means that they instantly. Okay, here's one of the ideas that might be useful for you to think about. I think projects that work are projects that don't need any explanation. Yeah, that are self-evidently a good thing to do. Now, this works because if you go to the people of Nottingham and say, we're going to recreate Torvill and Dean's Bolero as a tribute to them, and we're going to involve everyone in the city, nobody will ask you, why do you want to do that? What's the point of that? Everybody will get it. Yeah? That's one of the important lessons of this. That when you're wanting to communicate with people for whom doing something like this is in every other sense weird. It is not normal for librarians and firemen to learn to dance in this way. But if you want to get them to be part of it, the starting point is a brilliant idea that they absolutely get, that connects with them.
We have thought about the memory idea because, of course, clearly they are proud of it. So it's something that everyone wants to be part of. And also for the kids that were not even born 30 years ago to keep these going through.
Well, in the part of France where I live, there is a town called Couche. It's in Burgundy. Couche has a festival that happens every 20 years. And I was taken as a child in 1968. I missed it in 1988. I saw it again in 2008. The most important, it's very short, it only lasts for 3 days. And it's a celebration of a legendary dragon that came to the town. So it's a kind of medieval fair type festival. And people build enormous floats. I don't know if you know this word, like on a lorry, a decorated thing. And it takes the whole afternoon for them all to go through the long street of the town. It takes literally 4 hours. Because people have worked on this for years, because they've had 20 years. But the thing that's special, which is why I remember it, of course, is that the 20 years means that you did it with your mother, and then you do it with your child. That's how it happens, because the 20th year is a generational leapfrog. So there's that really important element of memory. The things that mattered to you, because this only happened once, and you really remember it, and then it comes along, and you want to pass on that memory to your child. And that's certainly part of what was happening here. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Is it then also something that's is it then also something that's used? Because if it was in 1984, I can imagine that for kids in primary school it's not so present anymore. So is it then also a way to keep something for certain heroes alive?
It's certainly not present for kids in primary school, but it's being passed on to them. I mean, Torvill and Dean are very famous names in Nottingham. And after they made a career as ice dancers. They left the police and they made a career as ice dancers in, if you like, a commercial thing. And they did their last performance, I think, probably the same year that this happened. So they have a star quality that means that their names remain true. But you're absolutely right, it is opening that up to another generation. Did you think it was good as dance?
Does this matter in this case? I don't think so.
Why does it not matter if something is good?
Because it's good. It's when I judge if it's good or bad. It's just my artistic outside eye, but that's not the question. When I see these projects, the project is. The question would be: did the people enjoy that? Did the people take something out of the project? So I don't think that this question really values for me in this kind of project.
I understand what you're saying. But if I was a participant, I might think that you were somehow not expecting very much of that you were deciding what would be good for me, and it would be good for me to do something that I'd enjoy, and that might raise some questions for me.
Okay, honestly, I know it's not good. If I see that and I would judge it, I would say no.
Technically.
What?
Technically.
Technically, no.
Yeah, that's it. But technically is not perfect, but doesn't mean it's not good.
I think this is some of what we'll talk about today. Technically, clearly, it's not good dance, and it would be absurd to say that it is good. You know, you see, one enormous footballer lifting up another enormous footballer. This is not good technical dance.
But I don't agree with that notion of then that is dance. If it's just about the technique, I think dance is also about the body and the body moving, and that I find very beautiful in this video, that I see very specific bodies who have this very specific way of moving, and then to see these two footballers do that really touches me, because that's a way they would never move together on the football field.
It's probably the best they can do.
Yeah, but it's not about this. I don't think dance anymore is about some technique that you can produce, but I think it's about discovering ways of bodies moving, and that's also how I see what is dance. So then for me, this is exactly what it is. So then it's a really good piece, a really good dance movie, actually.
So
I'm looking at an edit, I'm not looking at the piece. So I have to be careful with what I see. I only see very small fragments of the different parts, and there's maybe 30 groups that have been performing 4 minutes. So I look at the edit of the director and I see that he has been focusing, or she has been focusing on showing people that are very dedicated to what they're doing. So if there were people that were not dedicated, they are left out, the image. And so my focus is on how beautiful it is if people are totally involved with what they're doing. And I relate to that in an emotional way. I really appreciate that. But I'm aware that I'm looking at an edit. So maybe the part where people were giggling or talking amongst each other is left out. We don't know.
okay,
But
I
I
think
do appreciate
the
that.
artwork is the film.
Mhm.
There wasn't a performance except the film. I mean, the performances were made to be filmed. So in that sense, so I take what you're saying completely. I think the film is what you're being asked to consider. Does this work as an artwork? But I think what we're beginning to open up is some really important questions about what good means and what criteria we adopt when we're looking at this kind of work. And I'll come to you right now, just want to finish my sentence. And crucially, what it means if there are different criteria for assessing participatory art and other forms of art. What are we saying if we think there need to be different criteria? In the next few hours, today and tomorrow, we'll have time to try and unpack some of those things. Yes.
Oh, just thinking that you kind of can't give credit to the choreography because that was original to the project, and also the music. I don't really have a point actually. That's just those two things. So you have to look at something else rather than the choreography and music.
I have also a question. It's not clear for me now. Are you saying that the piece of art we should reflect on is the movie? Because for me, I see the project behind the movie, and for me, it's more like it's a nicely, in a high quality edited summary of the project. So it's not just 1 minute of short 5 seconds from everybody. So everybody is. Have seen herself on point, but it's really perfectly on the music, so it's a good quality. But of course, I feel another volume behind. So I cannot. In this point, for me, it's pointless to judge the movie because I don't feel it's the movie as a main part of it. I feel a very small part of it.
Okay, I think you both raised interesting things. I did think about what you were saying while you were speaking, as well as listening. I can multitask. I think part of what you touched on is a debate that has been going on since community art emerged in the mid-1960s, which is a debate that is often summarised as being between process and product. What is the bit that matters? Personally, whilst I think it's an interesting debate and it's useful to talk about these things, I think the work participatory art depends on both. This project would not have worked if that film had not been beautiful and been shown on Knox TV. Because actually it's people seeing themselves and their work validated in that way that makes what they did, the process that they went through, meaningful to them, or additionally meaningful to them. It gives it a purpose. And we'll talk about that in a moment.
They're dependent on each other, the project and the process.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see how it's a debate. If everyone sees it in their way, if you think the process is more, if that is your opinion and someone else has a different opinion, then those are both two different kinds of truths. So there is not one universal outcome. I can see whatever I want to see, I can think of it whatever I want to. Nobody can tell me that.
Is that not true of art in general?
It is.
It is, yes, I
But
agree.
I like this point. I accepted his opinion.
But
Well,
nobody.
maybe we feel different the percentage.
Yeah,
of
but nobody can
importance.
tell you what you think of something.
Yes, but it's very true that maybe the quality of this movie influences my image about the project. So if it's just a lower quality, how I could edit probably, then maybe I don't feel as a very high as a project with a high level of value.
Yeah, sure, it's dependent on a lot of things, but the end
So
it's still...
it's true that I feel that this movie is a work of an artist or somebody who has a good eye how to do it. But the people who participated, yeah, I can understand. It's also somehow a goal to see myself in the end. But I think to have these rehearsals together, to have a work together with my colleagues, there is already somehow or must be an impact for them before seeing
There
them
absolutely
in the
there
video.
is as I say, I think the two things are inseparable. The process and the product are in a cycle, and they reinforce it. When in the best work, they are mutually reinforcing, and you can go around that cycle a number of times and continue to strengthen it. Okay, let's first of all thank you for opening up some of those really important questions. They will come back in what we'll talk about. What I wanted to talk about this afternoon, because in preparing this, we talked about starting with a lecture. I'm not really a lecturer, but I'm going to outline a set of ideas for you. And then tomorrow we'll have more time for more discussion, and we'll look at some other examples and projects. But this is a bit of a theoretical thing. First of all, let me ask, how many of you use the term participatory art at the moment to describe your work? Yeah?
Yeah.
Only one. What other words do you use to describe your work?
Interact.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusive.
As I was walking here with Paul, I was we touched briefly on some deep changes that are happening in art history and in our culture. And one of the aspects of that I would describe as the normalisation of participatory art. Okay, so when I started in community art in 1981, I'd never heard of it until I turned up in that community print shop. When I told my parents I had a job as a apprentice community arts worker, I think the only word they could understand there was apprentice, probably. Most people didn't have a clue what community arts was. But actually, it's also important to understand. In 1981, art was very marginal in the UK and in most European societies. Marginal in the sense that it was supported by the state, and it was a commercial activity, and it was an amateur activity. There were those three big domains: the public art, public institutions, public cultural institutions, the commercial production of art, and amateur work. Right? But it had very little presence in the public space. Okay, there was the Tate Gallery in London. At the time, there was only one Tate Gallery. Now there are four. And people who liked art might go to the Tate Gallery. What's happened in the 35 years since then has been an extraordinary explosion of art and culture and its place in the economic life and the social life of our society. Just to give you one example, in 1981 there were 3 TV channels in the UK. BBC One, BBC Two and ITV, which was the commercial channel. That was it. There were, in the broadsheet newspaper, there would be half a page of art reviews, which were basically the latest theatre and concerts, and that was it. It was almost invisible as part of life. Now, we've got to the stage where people think it's completely normal to make a piece like Masperlera. Participatory art has become normal in all kinds of ways, and these are just some of the labels under which it is currently practiced. Not all of these labels. One of the things about these labels, I think, is that they're not very helpful. And for me, okay, let me do. Have we got a pen anywhere? Is there a felt pen I can write on this? No? Okay, doesn't matter. I will mime it. I think the history of participatory arts in its modern phase begins in the mid-1960s in the UK. And most of what I'm going to talk about now has a strong UK bias, and I'm sorry about that, but it's what I know. So it begins in the 1960s in the UK, and at the time it's called community art. And it is radical. Partly it's politically radical, but more importantly, it is artistically radical. And I think that's one of the things that is misunderstood and underestimated. The young people who invented community arts in 67, 68, through to the mid-1980s, which is what I've talked about in that paper that you've read. Their motivation, I think, was primarily a rejection of the art world as it was currently constituted, because they saw it as exclusive, as controlling, as uninterested in most people's lives. And many of those young community artists were the first of their generation, first of their kind to go to art school or to have higher education because they were part of that baby boomer generation. Okay? So the first phase of community arts was a confrontation between young radical artists and the art world. It was understood as a confrontation about politics, because some of it was, but I don't think that was the important thing that was happening. So this is what I would have drawn on this bit of paper. There is a kind of mountain spring that I would describe as community art, which is very lively and bubbly, but also quite small. In the second phase of what I describe as participatory art, it becomes a river. It becomes partly institutionalized. It becomes taken up. Some of those methods and practices become taken up by the very institutions that the community artists were trying to overthrow. So, audience development work, education work, outreach work starts to be done by those institutions. So, for instance, this Mas Bolero was a production by Nottingham Playhouse, one of the great kind of cultural institutions that has a great deal of public money compared to that. Alone, it has more public money than all of the community arts and participatory arts organisations in the city, probably in the county. So then that little stream becomes a river. It's much more slow-flowing, it's much more well-managed and disciplined. And it eventually becomes a delta. It fragments into 100 little streams. And this is the delta of participatory art. And I now use the word participatory art for the whole river. And it's difficult to get your head around this because although community art was the parent of participatory art, actually to understand the participatory art conceptually and theoretically, you need to understand the whole thing as a coherent river, from that mountain stream to the broad river to the delta at the end, when it all fragments into lots of different things, where everybody is very concerned about I sometimes think of all of these things as a series of Protestant sects, after the Reformation, where everybody's really concerned with the purity of their sect as opposed to every other sect that there might be, but actually they have far more in common than they have that distinguishes them, and what they have in common is participatory art.
Beginning when do you think this should be?
I think the community art in Britain ended in the late 1980s, and that's partly talked about in the paper that you have, but I've also written that I am writing about it in a much more detailed way. And the failure or the end of community art is partly to do with the rise of neoliberalism, or the dominance of neoliberalism. The 1980s are the period when there is a battle in America, Australia, and the UK, primarily. Also, to a degree, perhaps in the Netherlands, between whether neoliberal economics and social ideas will succeed or not. And they do succeed first in Reagan's America, Thatcher's Britain, Howard's Australia, and now they have become pretty much global, but they may also be coming to the end of their ascendancy. So partly community arts is defeated simply by the movement of history. It is out of step with the historical movements, the political movements of its time. Partly it runs out of step because it runs out of, it dies because those young radical artists are now in their late 30s, and they have families, and they don't have the same energy that they had when they were 20. They're not prepared to live in a caravan or a squat. They're not prepared to live on unemployment benefit and do the things that they would do then. And so some of them move out of art altogether. Some of them take jobs within the art world, and to some extent they settle down. The next generation is coming up, and they have to accommodate themselves to the world in which they are living. And the work that I did in 1997 is kind of symbolic of that accommodation. So the research that I did, which was published as Use or Ornament, which was about the social impact of participation in the arts, it seemed to have had a big impact on British cultural policy. Particularly, it coincided with the election of the new Labour government. And a lot of that discourse, the second generation of community art, participatory art, I think runs from the late 1980s until the financial crash. And it is characterised by community artists trying to work with the state, because they can't not, because the state has refused to be overthrown. So they have to say, okay, well, we can still try and find ways to do some, to achieve some of what we're trying to do. So that changes the whole relationship of community art, and which is why I think the change happens to participatory art. But the other half of that, so I think I would now describe what happened to community art in the during the 1990s and the 2000s as a form of institutionalization. So it was institutionalized by the art world, but of course that also meant that the art world was infected by its ideas. Both sides change. And a lot of these things are very art world ideas. So you talk about relational aesthetics. Do you know about relational aesthetics? It's familiar. A French curator called Nicolas Bourdieu invented the term. And it's very much a contemporary art practice about how the artist is creating situations in which relationships are opened up and explored between the artist or between the audience and the artist, or between the audience members themselves. So some of these things are very much the art world seeing the trend towards participation, seeing that it is innovative and exciting, and lots of ordinary people are interested in it, which is what you see in the Masbolero thing, how readily people are willing to take part in things, and saying, oh, we'll have some of that, in the way that the art world generally does, because the art world is the modern art world, the post-Enlightenment art world. I think it's not an accident that it coincides with the period of European imperialism and colonialism. It's very good at taking other things and saying, oh yes, we'll have that. And I think that's part of what it has done to participation. Okay, I'm running ahead of myself. I'm telling you a whole bunch of stuff, which is both contentious and probably I'm skating over too lightly. Let's go on. I want to suggest to you this definition. When I talk about that river, that long river that has its different characteristic elements, what it all shares, what all those different things on the last page did was this: the creation of art by professional and non-professional artists. Okay? Now, that sounds very simple, but I think it has already two contested and controversial ideas. Before I tell you what I think they are, tell me what you think of my definition. Anyone? Or ask me a question.
Yeah, I question when I see the definition. Is it only participatory art if it's a collaboration between professional and non-professional artists? Because it doesn't really.
I would say if it's participatory, why is not with instead by?
Good question, and I will answer it. I want to see if there are other questions or thoughts or comments. I think your question is taking me towards the difference between participatory art and community art, and I think there is still something called community art which is far more demanding. This is not at all demanding, although for some people it's already too demanding. Yes.
I think that maybe the definitions of professional and non-professional can be controversial.
Sorry, say that again?
The definitions of professional and non-professional can be controversial.
They certainly can be,
Yeah.
and they're part of what I'm going to talk about.
Also, the definition of art can be.
Those are the two things.
Worry about those two.
That are controversial. So, although this appears to be a simple definition, it is already contested and controversial. Let me talk about why. So, the first is the creation of an artwork. Yeah? That participatory art involves the creation of an artwork. Why? Why do I need to say that?
It includes the process and the product. What?
Because
the process and the product.
Because quite often there are people who think that doing something artistic is enough. That doing a dance workshop is enough. That teaching somebody some music is enough. It's not. That's education. Education is a very good thing. Not have a problem with it at all. But it is not art. Unless you are making an artwork, you are involved in an educational or perhaps a social project with other goals, and we'll talk about some of that in the examples I will show. But you are not involved in making art. And it's paradoxical that you need to say that, but you do, because one of the things that happens is that when institutions, when policymakers, when funders start thinking about how do we do art with people who don't do art, they start forgetting that their question began with how do we do art. And they start thinking, how do we do good with people who don't do art? In other words, how do we bring about some social change for that group? Now, that social change is possible, and I'm by no means dismissing it. But what I am making a case for is that you need to understand, as artists and practitioners, you need to understand both for ethical reasons and for artistic reasons, whether what you are involved in is a project of social change or a project of artistic creation. Can you separate them?
Why do you separate them?
Why do you separate them? There is overlap, and we'll come to that. I'm going to talk more about intentions in a minute. But you need to understand what it is you are doing. what your purpose is. I think in the end, good work has only one purpose. It's not possible to go in two directions at once. So I think that community art and participatory arts often has profound social and educational value. But it has that as a consequence of being good artistic work. If your purpose is social change, then it follows that if you discovered that, let's say you were doing a dance project with young people because you wanted to strengthen integration or to divert them away from criminal activities or whatever it might be. It follows that if you discovered that they would rather be playing football and it was more successful, then you should stop doing dance with them and do football with them, if that is your purpose. Yeah?
Yeah, continue. I
Okay.
don't completely.
So what I'm saying here is that for something to be called participatory art, it has to involve the creation of an artwork. And I go back to that sense of art being a fundamental, essential thing, a way of knowing, and consequently a way of expressing and communicating in the world that allows us to understand our experience and to try and share it with other people in ways that nothing else allows us to do. Yeah?
And when we create the product and artwork, but we don't care that much for that. I mean, we care as institutions about the process and the change, the social change, and by chance we create something by that. Does that piece can be an artwork?
I think you can define an artwork in a lot of different ways, and there are certainly people who would define it in ways that I wouldn't. There are a lot. One of the earliest lessons I learned as a community arts worker is that there are lots of people who work in different ways to me and still do good work. I'm not, in anything that I'm saying here, I'm generally not trying to be prescriptive. I will be clear with you and say this is what I believe to be right, but I also recognise that other people see things differently, and I look at their work and I think it's often excellent. So I think there are different routes to this and different ways of defining what an artwork is. But I think that participatory art requires that artistic intention that you are making art. Otherwise, as I say, you are involved in some kind of educational activity or some kind of social activity, which may be very useful. And one of the projects, for instance, I will show you a bit later. There's a theatre company called Geese. You've heard of them?
I know.
Okay. So they work in the criminal justice system. They've been working for 25 years. They're based in Birmingham. In the UK, we have one of the largest prison populations in Europe, and we have, I think it's fair to say, a fairly harsh set of attitudes towards prisoners and rehabilitation. In order to work in theatre in that system, you have to be able to demonstrate to the authorities that there is some social value to what you're doing. They're not going to let you in to come and do a nice theatre project. So that is a company that has a very, very strong social agenda. It's very sophisticated about how it is able to talk about it.
Yeah, I question if you're starting to work on an artistic project with the for example, prisoners, I think it's quite impossible to not create some sort of social change in that, even if it's not intended, because you are working intensively with people, and it might fail in some way, but it will have some sort of social impact, I think.
I think all art has social
Yeah.
impact. You know, taking businessmen to the opera has social impact.
Yeah.
It's how they make deals. No, I'm serious. We are very condescending when we think that only some people need social impact. You know, that system of business sponsorship of fine art happens because it suits the commercial sponsors who do it. It has a social impact.
But do you think it is possible to work on a participatory art project and not have a social impact?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying all art has a social impact.
Yeah.
So there are two questions. No, there are many questions, but let's just start with two. One is the social impact good? Okay, is the facilitation of business deals over champagne at the Opera House a desirable social impact or not? The second is, what is your intention? One of the ways in which my work, I think, has sometimes been misunderstood is when because I wrote this first book that reported on the social impact of the arts, of participation in the arts. Some people thought that that meant that social impact was something you did to people. And that's not my position at all. Clearly, when you go back to Matarasso, all those people who were involved in that dance will have had a whole range of benefits, including, as you said, the changing relationships in the workplace and so on. They may have a greater sense of belonging and pride in their city. They may have experienced joy and delight and pride in their own achievement. They may have thought, some of them may have gone on to go to dance classes because they really enjoyed this and they've never done it. Who knows? But nobody made those things happen. And for me, this is a critical ethical issue. Because if you invite me to be involved in your project, and okay, you've got some funding from the municipality to help to do a dance project with unfit 60-year-old men like me. And you have persuaded the municipality that this will be good on a public health basis. You know, this will reduce my alcohol consumption and generally get me fitter and reduce my likelihood to have a heart attack. Are you going to tell me that when you invite me to join in your dance project? If you don't tell me that, what's going on? Are you manipulating me? Are you lying to me? Are you despising me as somebody that you think you can have an impact on without telling me? I think that raises really deep moral, ethical issues. We're not entitled to do things to other people without their informed knowledge and consent. For me, that's a basic principle. Yeah. So of course there is impact, but it happens naturally out of what you do. So yes, if you get me involved in your dance project, and I accept, I hate that, you addressing your offending behaviour. Do you want to be involved in it or not? That remains an option. So the choice to do that is an honest one, because you can be honest with people.
I'm just curious how you see the work of Augusto Boll in the light of what you're saying.
Similar fashion. And it's the making art that matters. So, in this case, you have a performance of Don Giovanni. Clearly, these 25 prisoners, young prisoners, who took part in this, they did not have opera voices. So they were professional singers as part of this. The way that Paolo Lamero, the artist who worked with them, imagined it is that he, I don't know how well you know Don Giovanni, and it's not opera is not an area of expertise, so if I sound like I know what I'm talking about, don't believe me. But Don Giovanni has a servant called Leporello. So Leporello, they were all playing Leporello. Right? So Leporello was sung by all the prisoners as a chorus, and sometimes individual prisoners would sing a line or whatever. That made it possible. The other main characters were sung by professional singers, except for the commendatore, who gets assassinated at the beginning of the opera, who was actually sung by the director of the prison, who was a key amateur singer. And he was actually killed by a prison guard. In the performance, he was killed by a prison guard. So this is what I mean by border situations. Suddenly things happened in fundamentally different ways. They mean different things when this is going on. And so for these guys, this is the finale. And the guys also composed a rap, which Mozart had not included in Don Giovanni. And what you're seeing there is their final rap with the orchestra playing. So having played Mozart, the orchestra then continued to play the rap with the prisoners. And what I love about this is just that sense of illustrating how everyone in that room was acting as an artist during that performance, but they were doing it differently and within their own, within what they could do, what they wanted to do, what their vision was, what their experience allowed them to do. Let me move on a little bit. So the important thing is that this is not to do with quality. Participatory art can be good, bad, or indifferent. Exactly like painting, exactly like theatre, exactly like dance. It's not a morally better or an artistically better form of practice than any other. Sorry, happens to be the one that I'm interested in and care about and believe in and think about, but it is just one kind of art practice, and it can be done well and it can be done badly, and it can be done for good reasons and for bad reasons. That said, like all art forms, all art practices, it is entitled to be assessed, to be judged on its best work, not its worst. The art world has tended to judge participatory art on its least good work, because that allows the art world to keep participatory art at arm's length, where it would like to keep it. Partly because participatory art challenges the power of the art world. For instance, by saying everyone could be an artist. That's not in the interest of the art world, where the special status of artists brings lots of advantages to people who have that special status. It's not in the interest of the art world to accept the idea that everyone could be an artist. The English novelist Kingsley Amis once wrote about William Morris was one of the first people to argue that everyone could be an artist in the modern art world. And Kingsley Amis said that would be true if making mud pies was considered an art form. And he then went on to say, which nowadays it probably is. That in that phrase of Kingsley Amis, I hear the art world defending its privileges. So it's really important to say that that definition that I've given is independent of quality. To say that everyone can be an artist is not the same as saying that everybody acts well as an artist. Yeah? Everybody can be a runner, everybody can be a dance. But, there is no world in which you are not a better dancer than me. Right? It's not possible. This is not my strength. For several of you, it is exactly your strength. And that's just a fact. It doesn't mean that I'm not capable, perhaps one day, of making a little dance act or gesture or piece that has integrity and emotional resonance and communicates. But it will be different to anything that a trained and gifted dancer would do. So, is participatory art a method or a form? This image is from a film, the second film by Mike Leigh, who's an English film director who was originally a theatre director, has moved very successfully into film now. But he was particularly admired and notable in his theatre practice and continuing to his film practice in working with his actors and creating scenes and dialogue together through improvisation. So the reason that I used this image is to show that actually an artist can work in a participatory way that is not participatory art. Which is why I don't think it's a method. For me, it's a practice or a form. In the same way as theatre is a practice or a form.
And why is it not participatory art then? Because the actors
they're all
are
professionals. Because they're all professionals. There are filmmakers who have worked with non-professional actors, and that can be remarkable. I think you know the film The Commitments. It's a great film. You should look it up. It's probably 20 years old, maybe 30 years old by now. It's a film of a book, the same name, set in working class Dublin, I think in the 1990s. It's about a group of poor kids who recreate a soul band, and that was made with non-professional actors.
And then it is automatically participatory.
I would describe that as participatory art.
Yeah.
That's why my definition is, I tried to keep it simple and clear.
Yeah.
My definition of community art, which we might get onto tomorrow, is more complex and more challenging and more demanding because it is more political. But broadly speaking, this is already, as you can see from the amount of questions and discussion we're having, enough to be going on.
The social work through arts can be participatory art, but not necessarily the other way around.
Social work through art, I think, can be participatory art.
In case we have an artwork form as well.
Let me skip on a minute. Okay. I was going to do this later, but maybe it's better particularly given the time. We've only got 10 minutes until you finish. So I'm just going to do this bit for you, and then we'll have to come back and do some of this other stuff later. Okay. I think there are three broad intentions that people bring to participatory art. The first is access to culture. People do participatory art because they want to enable people to have access to art or culture. This is sometimes, in policy terms, this is sometimes described as cultural democratization. It is essentially the foundation of post-war public cultural policy in Western Europe. And actually, I should probably stop saying Western Europe. In Europe, in some ways, well, officially it would have been the same in the old Soviet sphere. But it is the idea. It emerges in the post-war world because it is associated with the welfare state. The welfare state that is providing housing and employment and health and education is also providing culture. Right? So some of that culture is simply by providing concert halls and museums and things like that. That was certainly the first part of it. And then it became, no, we should also provide people opportunities to enjoy and participate in culture. So that's a big field of intention. The second big field of intention for participatory art is to bring about social change. One of the roots of participatory art was actually not in Europe at all. It was in post-colonial societies in particularly in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in India, where theatre was seen as a means of community development. And that in the 50s and 60s was quite strong. It was also quite, I mean, it's not an accident that the two of the most influential thinkers in this field, one of whom you mentioned, Augusto Boal, and Paulo Freire, who you know in terms of an educator, were from Brazil, from the global south. And that sense of political change happening was always central. So there has always been a lot of participatory art which is about social change. And that's another important dimension. The third big intention I describe as cultural democracy, which is an idea that emerged in the 1970s, principally through the Council of Europe and the community arts movement. And it was an idea that emerged in opposition to the idea of artistic democratization. What it was saying was it's not enough to give people access to the products of other people's artistic work. What people need is, if you forgive the Marxist terms, access to the means of cultural production. In other words, in order to be fully citizens of a democracy, they needed to be able to be artists themselves. And that's the core of the concept of cultural democracy. Now, those three, somewhere in the middle of these, is an intention to empower people through art or culture. But between them, what I think they do is outline a territory of shifting intentions. I think these the reason I've drawn these intentions as overlapping fields is because they are not mutually exclusive. And within an organisation, there may be people who feel closer to one or other of those intentions. People may shift during their professional life or even during the course of a project. The project itself may start off being about access to culture, for instance, and shift more towards social change because of that balance between professional and non-professional people, which means that you, as the professional artists, are not in charge of what is happening. That means people may take it in directions, or they may also bring intentions to it that go in other directions that you have not necessarily chosen or intended. So I think the field of participatory arts is this big territory within which people situate themselves, and where you choose to situate yourself is about where you feel comfortable, where your ideas work, and that may change over time. I'm aware that I've thrown a lot of ideas at you, and some of them will be unfamiliar because the sense of ambiguity, that there is not one answer to these, there is not one correct intention, there is not one good reason for doing this. I say that because I think it's true. It reflects my experience of seeing the work that I've seen over the years and listening to the people who do it. I think this is and it's part of why I describe it as a border territory. It's full of people with one foot in one place and one foot in another place. It's full of, you used the word collaboration, I think. It's full of people with different professional interests, different political interests, different artistic interests, finding enough common ground between their different intentions to make something that they believe in happen. The easiest way you can see it is if you look at the field of arts and health, which is very big now. Health institutions that support arts and health programs do not do so because they're interested in art. They do it because they think there is a clear benefit in terms of health and well-being. Yeah? The artist is also not doing it because they're trying to promote health and well-being, otherwise they'd be an art therapist. But in that overlap, there's enough common ground for them both to feel comfortable working together. Okay.
It's 5 o'clock. Do we have 15 minutes left for us just to pose some questions, to round up, to utter the associations, things like that? Is that okay? 15 minutes? And then really stop it. Okay. Anyone? Yeah.
What if an institution, municipality for example, with specific politics, creates a process and an artwork, but it doesn't want any social change or any real access or whatever? Is it a participatory art?
It can be. I mean, I don't think all participatory art is good. There's a project I didn't show you now, but I'll try and show you tomorrow. And there's quite a lot of contemporary art which uses participatory methods. And I would say maybe at best, it's best to say in ways that I wouldn't. So I don't, that's what it goes back to that sense that the theoretical ideas I've been outlining have to be separated from questions of quality. And it's really difficult to do because we live in a culture where art is seen to be a natural good. And I don't think it is. Art is a power. How we use that power is we can use that power in all sorts of ways. Some of which are good, some which are not good. And I think that's true of participatory art because I think participatory art is art, not education or anything else. So one of the really big risks of participatory art is manipulation. That you manipulate the people you work with or you manipulate audiences. And that's the tension for me in invisible theatre. Invisible theatre is deeply manipulative practice.
Can I have a second question connected to that? So in case of those contemporary groups that create this kind